Generation X.
Here we go.
1965 to 1980.
Rebellious
You came
ones.
home from... No one tracked your location. You learned that you had to solve your own problems because there was no one else around to solve them for you. This gave your generation something that kids today will never understand. True freedom.
Facts.
There was Generation 1928 to 1945. You were born into a world that was already on fire. The wrong friend could ruin your entire life.
Serious.
When keeping quiet keeps you safe, you learn to keep quiet. For the silent generation, it wasn't a strategy. It was survival.
Today, your fellow Gen Z Brit, born in the 2000s, very curious man, is going to be checking out every generation explained in 11 minutes from 1901 to 1980. So from what I'm aware, this is going to be the greatest generation to Gen X. I feel kind of left out right now. Listen, this is going to be really interesting as well because as much as I love diving into intergenerational dynamics, one of the big reasons for that is because I feel like it's really interesting to see kind of the different upbringings generations had, because it kind of helps you build a picture as to kind of why maybe either it's your parents or your children even, or even yourself, kind of are the way you are to a degree. Because, you know, a lot of these like events that would have happened during these times definitely would have shaped a lot of the psyches of people who grew up during these decades. I'm excited to dive into this one. I'd love to know how this one resonates with you guys watching. Let me know in the comment section below. And yeah, guys, with that being said, let's see what this video is all about.
The Greatest Generation, 1901 to 1927. Imagine being 10 years old and watching your father lose everything. Not a job, everything. The savings, the house, the certainty that tomorrow would be better than today. That was the Great Depression. And for the Greatest Generation, it wasn't a chapter in a history book, it was childhood. You learned early that the world didn't owe you anything. You watched your parents stretch a single meal across 3 days.
Serious?
You wore your older brother's shoes until your toes bent against the front. You didn't ask for more, because you saw what more cost the people around you. And then, just as you reached adulthood, the world asked for something else. It asked you to fight. World War II didn't just define this generation, it forged them. 18-year-olds stormed beaches. 19-year-olds flew bombing missions over Europe. And the ones who stayed home rationed sugar, grew victory gardens, and worked factory lines until their hands cracked. Extreme, shared adversity does something to people. It hardens them. Not in a cold way, in a resilient way.
Wow.
But for the Greatest Generation, it wasn't something they thought.
By the way, this AI generated stuff going on in the background, solid. It's pretty good. It's really making it more immersive because I'm picturing it like, wow, going from seeing your parents lose everything, then you're in the war straight away. Woo. Hey,
Shared adversity does something to people. It hardens them. Not in a cold way, in a resilient way. But for the Greatest Generation, it wasn't something they thought about. It was just life. This is why they don't talk about their feelings. Not because they don't have them, but because they came from a world where feelings were a luxury. You didn't process trauma. You buried it and kept moving because there was a war to win and a family to feed. This generation built something psychologists now call stoic pragmatism. The belief that hardship is inevitable, complaining is pointless, and the only thing that matters is what you do next. And here's what that gave them, an almost supernatural ability to endure. They could sit with uncertainty without spiraling. They could lose something meaningful and start over the next morning. They didn't need the world to be fair. They just needed a clear task and the freedom to get it done. They carried it into the factories and boardrooms of post-war America. They carried it into their marriages and their parenting. And whether they knew it or not, they passed it down, in smaller, diluted doses, to every generation that followed.
Oh god, this is cinematic as well, guys. Like I haven't seen this video before. Like I'm impressed with how it's starting. It's painting a great picture, and I think a lot of that even opens up my eye as well to, you know, this was tough times that they went through, and like he said, when you're going through difficult times, like feelings, it gets to a point where feelings are luxury. We don't have time to feel. We don't have time to process. There's a war on hand. Whereas you fast forward to nowadays, you know, especially with my generation, you hear it all the time. You know, we need mental health breaks. And a lot of that, I mean, to a degree, can you blame us? A lot of it, you look at the times that we're going up in, it's like no major wars. There's like no major real concerns that are in the forefront of like our lives. So it's kind of like when there's not much else to worry about, it's like you have so much room to think about how you feel about things and to care about the why behind things. Anyway, that just opened our eyes, and I'd love to know how you guys took that one as well, how that resonated with you.
They carried it into the factories and boardrooms of post-war America. They carried it into their marriages and their parenting. And whether they knew it or not, they passed it down in smaller, diluted doses to every generation that followed.
Let's see.
The Silent Generation, 1928 to 1945. You were born into a world that was already on fire. The Depression shaped your earliest memories. You remember your mother boiling the same bones twice to stretch a soup. You remember your father leaving before sunrise and coming home with nothing. And if you were one of the millions in Oklahoma, Texas, or Kansas, you remember the sky turning black in the middle of the day, dust storms so thick your mother put wet rags over your baby sister's face just so she could breathe. Families packing everything they owned into a truck and heading west on Route 66, only to be turned away at the California border. You learned that silence was safer than asking questions, because the adults didn't have answers either. And then the war came. You watched the men leave, brothers, cousins, neighbours. Some of them didn't come back. You sat by the radio with your family, listening to reports from places you couldn't find on a map, learning that the world was larger and more dangerous than anyone had told you. By the time the war ended, you'd already internalized the lesson. Keep your head down. Don't make waves. The people who spoke up, who stood out, who questioned authority, you saw what happened to them. And then came McCarthy, and with him, the Red Scare. The Red Scare didn't just target communists, it targeted anyone who looked different, thought different, or asked the wrong questions. Teachers fired for what they read, actors blacklisted for meetings they'd attended 10 years earlier, neighbours turning on neighbours. You learned that even in peacetime, the wrong word or the wrong friend could ruin your entire life.
Serious.
When keeping quiet keeps you safe, you learn to keep quiet. It becomes instinct. For the silent generation, it wasn't a strategy. It was survival. This is why they followed the rules. Not because they lacked imagination, but because they'd seen what happened to people who didn't. They built their lives on stability, not self-expression. They took the secure job, married young, stayed put. This created a generation with an unshakable reliability, who clocked in early and never complained, who fixed what was broken and didn't wait for thanks. And while other generations raised their voices, they were the ones who kept the world turning.
Whew. Okay, yeah, and again, another insightful description of the silent generation. I feel like, the name is very fitting, and yeah, when you see the environment they grew up in, it 100% makes sense why the majority of them were very silent, like they said, because you see what happens when you talk out. Yeesh. But then it makes for very reliable people that that will follow what you want them to. But then as society progresses, we kind of feel like we see how that method tends to not work over time. And I feel like we're going to see something similar as well as we go on in this video as well, because you see how times change and how different skills are going to be necessary for different generations, which oftentimes shape a big majority of these generations here, man. Well, yeah, crazy.
And while other generations raised their voices, they were the ones who kept the world turning. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1964.
The infamous baby boomers.
You were born into victory. The war was over. The economy was booming. Your parents had survived the Depression and fought the Nazis, and now they wanted one thing: a normal life, a house, a yard, kids, lots of kids. And so you arrived, 76 million of you, into a world that seemed to be expanding in every direction. New highways, new suburbs, new televisions in every living room. For the first time in decades, the future looked like something to run toward, not something to survive. But underneath all that optimism, there was a shadow. You grew up practicing duck and cover drills beneath your school desk. You watched your parents track the Cuban Missile Crisis on the evening news, their faces tight with a fear they wouldn't explain. You learned that the world could end in a flash, literally, and that there was nothing you could do about it except keep living. And then the cracks started to show. You watched Walter Cronkite's voice break when he announced JFK was dead. 4 years later, Martin Luther King. 2 months after that, Bobby Kennedy. 3 assassinations in 5 years. Those as young as 18 got drafted into a war that didn't make sense. Vietnam wasn't like World War II. There was no clear enemy, no front line, no moment of victory. Just jungles, guerrilla fighters, and a government that kept saying we were winning while the body counts climbed every night on the evening news. It was the first war Americans watched from their living rooms, and what they saw didn't match what they were being told. Some of you went, some of you marched against it, but all of you were shaped by it, by the realization that the institutions your parents trusted might not deserve that trust. That kind of betrayal rewires how you see authority. For boomers, it wasn't a headline. It was body bags on the evening news while the government promised victory was near. But here's the contradiction. The same generation that protested the system eventually ran it. The hippies became CEOs. The radicals became senators. The kids who marched for civil rights, women's liberation, and environmental protection grew up to build the most consumer-driven economy in history. They became experts at reinvention, at pivoting when the world shifted. It's why they're still working, still leading, still refusing to step aside. They've been adapting their whole lives. Generation Joe.
You know what? Because a lot of the baby boomers are the CEOs right now, isn't it? Like the people in high positions. What was the other day I was seeing? Like a lot of the presidents in the US recently, most of them are baby boomers. Has there been a Gen X president so far? I actually don't know. You guys let me know if you know. But it's interesting to think about as well. Again, the influence that baby boomers have now, but then also the how the world they grew up in, and to be the ones in the Vietnam War, and then was that the hippie movement I was seeing there, to protest against the Vietnam War and stuff like that. It's a very interesting transition. Wow. And I feel like this is a generation that I feel like gets a lot of flack by a lot of different generations for different reasons. This is,
shifted. It's why they're still working, still leading, still refusing to step aside. They've been adapting their whole lives. Generation Jones.
Oh yeah, now you reminded me. Even what because a lot of you guys would have been seeing like what was going on like your TVs with the Vietnam War. I feel like that kind of reminds me of what you're seeing nowadays with like Gen Z being like hyper exposed to information and you're seeing the effects of that now as well. So it's interesting as well just to see, the impact TV had in like this time period of people who are seeing what was going on in Vietnam War. Starting to distrust the media institutions when they're seeing what's going on and they're comparing it to what they're saying. You can imagine what it's like for Gen Z now, who see stuff all the time. We're seeing too much even. It's interesting.
Refusing to step aside. They've been adapting their whole lives. Generation Jones, 1954 to 1965.
Okay.
If you were born in the late 50s or early 60s, you probably don't recognize yourself in the boomer story. You didn't march on Washington. You didn't go to Woodstock. You were 8, maybe 10 years old, watching it on TV in your living room. Too young to join, but old enough to believe it meant something. You came home from school to Brady Bunch optimism and dinner on the table. Your older siblings told you the world was changing, that anything was possible. You were a teenager when Nixon resigned. You sat in front of the TV and watched a president lie about Watergate for 2 years, get caught on tape, and resign before they could throw him out. Watergate wasn't just a scandal. It was the moment you learned that sometimes the people in charge couldn't be trusted. Your older siblings marched against the war, but by the time you were old enough to be drafted, the war had already ended. The cause that defined their generation wasn't yours to fight. Then you turned 18. You were handed your driver's license just in time to sit in gas lines that stretched for blocks. The result of an oil embargo that brought America to its knees. You watched the news and heard words like stagflation, prices climbing while jobs vanished. By the time you were ready to buy your first home, mortgage rates hit an all-time high at 18%. The older boomers had already bought houses, started careers and locked in their pensions. You got to watch from the outside, wondering what happened to the life you were promised. And that's why they call you Generation Jones.
Wow.
The generation that spent its whole life jonesing for something just out of reach. You had all the hope of the generation before you, but none of the timing. So you stopped waiting. You took what was available, made it work, and learned not to count on the world delivering what it promised. You became the bridge. You're not boomers. You're not Gen X. You're the ones who fell through the cracks and built a life there anyway.
Hey, and I love this video highlighting Generation Jones as well. I feel like a generation you don't hear get mentioned. Like I said, the in-between the boomers and the Gen Xers.
You're the ones who fell through the cracks and built a life there anyway. Generation X,
Here we go.
1965 to 1980.
The rebellious
You came
ones.
home from school and the house was empty. No one texted to check on you. No one tracked your location. You let yourself in with the key around your neck, made a snack, and figured out the afternoon on your own. Maybe you watched TV. Maybe you rode your bike until the streetlights came on. Maybe you got into trouble and learned how to get yourself out of it. That was just childhood. Your parents were at work, which meant you were on your own. And this wired something into you from an early age. You learned that you had to solve your own problems because there was no one else around to solve them for you. This gave your generation something that kids today will never understand. True freedom.
Facts.
There was no GPS, no notifications, no one tracking where you were or when you'd be back. You left the house on a Saturday morning and came home when the streetlights flickered on, and in between you were a ghost. You built forts in the woods. You biked to the next town just to see what was there. You played until your legs hurt and drank from the garden hose because going inside meant the day was over. If you made a mistake at 16, it stayed at 16. No camera in every pocket, no screenshot, no permanent record of every dumb thing you said or did.
Right.
You got to be young and stupid in private. And that gave you room to figure out who you were without the whole world watching.
Right.
But it wasn't all long summers and freedom. You saw things too. You watched your parents' generation get hit hard. The early 80s recession, the stock market crash of 87, the layoffs and corporate downsizing that followed. You watched your parents sit at the kitchen table, voices low, bills spread out. You didn't understand all of it, but you understood enough. By the time you entered the workforce in the early 90s, another recession was waiting for you. You learned early that loyalty to a company didn't mean the company would be loyal back.
Right.
The job for life your parents believed in was already dying, and you knew it. This didn't make Gen X lazy. It made them clear-eyed. You worked hard, but you didn't confuse hard work with job security. You didn't expect a gold watch or a pension. You expected to earn your place every single day because you'd seen what happened to people who assumed they were safe. You kept your skills sharp and your resume ready. Not because you didn't care, but because you'd learned the hard way that no one was going to look out for you but you. Some people call it cynicism. For Gen X, it's just reality. You learned early that no one was coming to save you, so you saved yourself.
Whew. Whew. Wow, what a video, man. I feel like there's things that I'm seeing from previous generations that I kind of have a feeling that Gen Z might start to like have similar things happen with them, except the difference is now with Gen Z is that we have so much information now at our fingertips, and there's almost like an overload. Like we're so exposed to how much, you know, the negatives, that for a lot of us it could cause inertia, and you know it's having to weather that storm, you know, in the way things are going now, how prices, food going up, where it feels even harder to get your foot in the door. You know, AI now is on the rise, is making job security seem a lot more unstable. We're being told like we can't trust the establishment as well. We can't trust the fact that we're going to be in jobs that are going to last us forever long, because we're now seeing how unstable things are, and that's shaping a lot of us, and a lot of us are going to have to be adaptable. At least that seems like that's how it's moving, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Gen X story, just with a lot less internet in between and a lot more feelings that are now being made aware to our generation. So it's going to be interesting to see how my generation pulls through into the adult ages. Listen, guys, look, that was very interesting. Every generation explained. Look, I've never seen it explained like this, and I even learned a couple things during this. I'd love to know how this one resonated with you guys. What part stood out? For any of you guys that will grow up in any of these generations, do you agree or disagree with what was being said? And for those of you guys that maybe weren't aware of those other ones, let me know what new things you learned. And did that open up your eyes or even change your perspective on how you viewed certain generations? Did it give you more like, you know, sympathy or empathy for certain periods, because now you realize even more so what they might have gone through and why they were the way they are? Anyways, guys, look, that's my reaction to this. Comment on the yellow heart or hashtag Flexer for those of you guys that made this point. Well, of course, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe channel, hype the video, do all of that good stuff. It always does me a big. And for those of you guys that do want to get an extra dose of nostalgia, if you're enjoying my content, then I've got a bunch of movie reactions, sitcom reactions, and music reactions that I do on the Patreon to some classics from the good old days, the analog days before I was born. So if you guys are interested in that, the link to the Patreon will be in the description. But other than that, guys, look, if you're going to see more videos like this, I've got plenty more that pop up at the end of this video. And with that being said, I'm your boy JayFlex, and I'll see you wonderful people in the next one. Peace.